So it became 2. In high-density ECOG recordings from the surface of the superior temporal gyrus of patients, the spectrotemporal auditory features of continuous speech could be reliably reconstructed from neural signals, and many words and pseudo-words could be statistically separated. Similarly, when song segments were played to research participants, the characteristic time-varying song patterns could be recognized from the smooth power changes of high gamma oscillations. The requirement for tracking the temporal dynamic of speech by brain rhythms is illustrated by experiments in which test sentences are time warped. When speech is compressed but comprehension is maintained, both phase locking and amplitude matching between the temporal envelopes of speech and the recorded brain signals are maintained. However, when speech comprehension is large, brain oscillations no longer effectively track speech and comprehension is degraded. An outside argument could be that the dynamic relationship between speech and brain oscillation is due to the imposition of speech patterns among brain patterns. In other words, speech stimuli train the brain to effectively segment and parse speech content. This argument has little validity because neuronal oscillations are the same in all mammals and speech rhythms are the same in every human culture. Instead, I suggest that the coding strategy of the auditory system is matched to internally organized brain rhythms. In support of this view, when rats hear complex sounds such as music or broadband pink noise, thalamocortical patterns in the superficial layers of the auditory cortex are also segmented in 2 to 4 frames per second. As in humans, these events reliably reset the phases of local field potentials at specific times of the acoustic stimulus. Overall, the preservation of brain rhythms across species suggests that human speech was built on pre-existing brain dynamics. So it's interesting to see how speech train brain patterns and brain pattern train speech, and how the development is fostered from the two sides. It's an interactive development. And this reminds me of seeing language as prosody, as mentioned here, that can make an understanding, but not a semantic understanding. It is a more direct understanding, and it's a deeper understanding. It reminds me of the voice of the friend, trying to discern words. Segmenting the words in the voice of the friend takes away what is given, what is handed. It is a diminishing of what the voice of the friend is. And this sounds a bit like having a left side hemisphere understanding and a right hemisphere understanding. But I think this is more comprehensive. It goes to the fact that everything has a purpose, and it's not a superficial layer in the language that is important. and how we are modulated, our modus, our Stimmung, can take away or can deepen the understanding. And that understanding is not just superficial, say, on the surface of language. I don't mean words up here. Words are also in the prosody. Don't think of words as sound, because prosody, pitch, there are 20 different layers. They are all important, but we don't notice them in ordinary language or perception. They are like the orchestra. Think of a big orchestra with 200 instruments, they're all playing, but you also listen to a solo, a violin, and that will play in a different way, not following the melody of the orchestra. That would be a bit too boring, nobody writes those concepts, but it's still interesting. But if you just say the whole concert is just a soloist, you will lose out on so much. You will also lose out on the interaction between the soloist and the rest of the orchestra. Think about 200 people in an orchestra and what that depth gives. It's a massive fractal conception, and we have some hints in the modern day. Questions, as Ian McGilchrist, has become more prominent, but there are questions that are not directed. You just ask, usually what, where, why, all the time. So the whole system knows it cannot reach into understanding. When it doesn't reach into understanding, as we mentioned before, understanding and knowledge, if that's not present, there is a lack. Everyone has a lack today, but this particular lack leads to more questions and exhaustion in the end. But there's no way out of it. More question won't help. Stopping to ask question won't help. Maybe stopping to ask question will make for a pause. That pause, the multi-level understanding can come. So it's more of having simultaneous levels at the same time, and that needs to be trained. The brain has several levels. Most people today can only access one level, one monosemic level, and that goes hand in hand with the limited cognition we have, with the sunken posture, the slouch post, not understanding the room around us, not being aware of what's happening around us, and thereby we cannot access projection, because projection and retention needs to be accessible simultaneously. So most people, as György will show, they do a really weird sort of horrible diminished planning. They used elements from the past and they put them together like Lego pieces, and they say this is planning. Take them apart and add them. Whereas proper planning, effective planning, the planning of athletes and good businessmen, successful people, is always memory and futuring at the same time. And they balance up, whereas the other people go back and then they go front. And they crazy, there's like 10% of the population are not even aware of being front forward or back forward. They lost that important awareness. And that is like losing out one's own limbs. Then you don't have access anymore. How to modulate, as Buzsaki says, how to modulate, how to be able to parse the brain rhythms, to think better. And I would say in a percentage of the population today, they don't even have an understanding that they could progress their thinking. Thinking is a no thing. They don't know they're thinking. Everything is out here. And the quality of thinking, somebody said to us, I read this in an interview in McGilchrist, my thinking is always the same. It was a schizophrenic patient who had only access to the left hemisphere. He had no insight at all. And he said, thinking is all the same. And of course, Ian McKilskis wrote some notes of being shocked. This is a scary experience. And that means that the modus cannot be changed. So where is the flexibility and where is the life then? Buzsaki shows that the most integral part of the brain function is access to the modus. And I will go into that more particular by David Bradell. He's been writing the most about the cerebellum and modality shifting. And just for instance, in other cultures in India, you have 40-50 modalities during the day, and you think different things during different hours of daylight or at night or whenever suitable, after dinner or when you're hungry or when you're having a cup of tea. Those modulations are incredibly important. And I say one non-noticing afternoon, if you press yourself, that capacity may not be regained for a long time. And doing that over and over again, this is what being burned out means. It means that you don't regulate your rhythm. You press yourself when you shouldn't press yourself. It's a little bit like running a marathon, and then you say, I'm going to add an enormous hill, an Everest on top of that. You will break yourself. And you can break your brain rhythms because they are always in a different level of healthiness. And in East Asia, they do train those because they have so many expressions, but you should be able to name at least 6 or 7 periods during the day and name those different thinking qualities or modus you experience during the day. Otherwise, you need to train, you need to look inside. 2 is not enough, like tired and not tired, like those are the only modus. No, there are a lot of them, and you will, after acquiring them, you will find subcategories, and then you will progress thinking, you will refine thinking more and more, and you will understand thinking is the most important feature. Once it has been internalized, as happens in youth, when you're being young, that is the most important feature to develop. And making more precise, more delicate, at the same time your body becomes more balanced, because you need the balance to project that slight tilt that makes the possibility for planning, or that small, maybe a millimeter, maybe 1 turn forward, great, turn back, it makes it possible for attention. And then you can do that simultaneously, both retention and pretension, future and past at the same time. And then we have come very far from the logocentric idea of one thin line of now, which is the only real, which is, I would say, the most common perception today of reality, which is incredibly limited, and it doesn't make it possible for simultaneous thinking. And having 2, this may be one stepping ladder, stepping stone, when you have 2 thinking procedures going on at the same time. Verbal, that's a good thing. Well, I say thank you very much, and thank you, György Buzsaki. It's incredibly interesting. Have a very pleasant afternoon, and bye-bye for now.